Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This panel this afternoon is really discussing an absolutely critical feature of everything here today. It's not about the basic science in so much it's about how can we translate this basic science into a reality which is both commercially viable and accessible to patients. So we have a fantastic group of panelists which really span the translation pathway from lab to bedside. And the format of a session is we're going to do some brief introductions, and then each of the panelists are going to present for about 10-15 minutes, each giving some background of their experience in biotech investment, and also where they think it's heading in the future. And then we're going to have a panel discussion, initially based upon what's been presented, but then we'll open it up to the floor. We have a great wealth of knowledge here, and I really hope we make the most of it. So first and foremost, by way of introductions, from your left to right, we have Jim Neal, who is a seasoned investor in all things, from biotech through to apps and widgets. And ultimately, I think that if you can't persuade an investor that the ideas are worth investing in, it sort of doesn't matter. If it can't get investment, it's never going to make it to a maximum number of patients. Then next we have Mike West. Few men have done, or women for that matter, have done as much for regenerative medicine as Mike. I think he's made more success than anybody else in the field, but also he's probably made some mistakes along the way he'd like to share so we don't make the same ones. Then at the very end we have Bernie, who has to be the leading patient advocate. For those of you that have been to Bernie's conferences every year, the World Stem Cell Summit, this year in San Antonio, you should all go and register, then it's a wonderful event. But what Bernie really does is show the patient need. And that's not just people espousing on the stage, it's genuine patients. And there's nothing more remarkable than going to Bernie's conference, going to the bar for a drink, and seeing patients there engaging with researchers. So absolutely fantastic events. And then finally we have Neil Littman, who's Director of Business Development at CIRM, the Californian Institute for Regenerative Medicine. I think it's fair to say that California is amongst the world's leading areas in regenerative medicine, and that's in no small part to the contribution, firstly, Californian taxpayers have paid in order to support CIRM's work, and the way in which CIRM have operationalized this vision and invest in really high-impact projects. I'm going to allow Neil to kick off with a short presentation, really giving the context of how CIRM came about, what it does and where it's heading, and really lay the foundation for investment in science at the earliest possible stage by an essentially public body. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, David. So thank you. I'm glad to have the opportunity to present today. So as David mentioned, I'd like to just give a little brief overview about CIRM for those of you who are not familiar with the organization, the types of things we fund, where we are in our funding life cycle, and sort of where we see the market these days in terms of trying to fund early stage, what we consider fairly high risk projects within the cell therapy field and specifically within stem cells. So let me start with an overview of CIRM. So the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine was established in 2004 with the passage of Proposition 71. So the voters of California authorized $3 billion of funding to fund stem cell research in California. We have a central vision and strategy early on. The Prop 71 was really passed in response to the federal ban on embryonic stem cell research. So early on, we had to establish new facilities in the state of California to actually house embryonic stem cell research. So we built a number of new facilities throughout leading academic universities. Over the past 3 to 4 years, I'd say our priority has really shifted to translational medicine and the clinical development and really driving therapies into the clinic. And then obviously going forward, our ultimate goal is to deliver cures and therapies to patients. So everything that we're doing from here on out is really geared towards getting therapies into the clinic, into patients, and driving therapies, efficiently and effectively to patients. Although our ultimate mission and goal is to deliver cures and therapies to patients, we have a lot of accomplishments that we've achieved along the way. We now have 10 therapies in clinical trials. We have close to 90 translational programs in our portfolio spanning a wide range of diseases. We've published, our grantees, I should say, have published over 1,750 papers, and we've, I think, really helped to seed and grow the field of stem cell research in California. So the question often comes up, how much have we spent to date? Well, we've allocated about $1.8 billion of funding. You can see this pie chart breaks down where that funding has gone. So we initially spent a lot of money on facilities, as I mentioned before. So that $372 million was leveraged with over $600 million of private sector financing. We also have training programs where we try to train a new generation of scientists, anywhere from the high school level to graduate level students. And then, of course, we fund basic research, translational medicine, and the development kind of falls within the translational portfolio. So we fund a variety of different stages of development. We fund everything from basic research really up until phase 2. And previously we had indicated we weren't going to fund any phase 3. I think that still holds true. We're not going to fund any large phase 3 clinical trials. But I think there will be certain aspects of phase 3 trials that we could fund for orphan type diseases. So we may fund everything up till filing of a BLA. And the bars below the chevron indicate those are just names of our different funding mechanisms. So early translational, disease team awards, strategic partnership, or different funding mechanisms or solicitations that we put forth to encourage applications. We also fund, very importantly, a variety of different modalities. So not only do we fund stem cells and cell therapies, we fund small molecules that stimulate endogenous endogenous stem cells. We fund biologics, so we have a portfolio of monoclonal antibodies targeting cancer stem cells. We fund genetically modified cell therapies, combination products, cell therapies on a scaffold. So I think that's important to keep in mind. This graph is nice because it shows the progress that we've made over the last several years in moving things into the clinic. And so by the end of this year, we plan to have or anticipate having 10 therapies in clinical trials. And so that's a significant achievement for us. And they span from everything from monoclonal antibodies targeting cancer stem cells. We have 2 academic investigators. One will be in the clinic for CLL, one will be in the clinic for solid tumors. ViaCyte is a company that we fund down in San Diego that actually just filed an IND. They're using an encapsulated cell therapy device for type 1 diabetics. They should be kicking off clinical trials very soon. So this goes in detail a little more about some of the programs that we do fund that will be entering the clinic this year. I can talk a little more about that. I think it's important to note that you have a choice between a grant or a loan when applying to CIRM. So academic applicants will obviously always take a grant. If you're a company, you do have a choice between a non-dilutive grant or a loan. There are 2 forms of loans. One's a forgivable loan, and so if the product is not successful, then that loan is forgivable. So I want to talk just a little bit about sort of what we've seen in the market. So obviously one of CIRM's roles is to help bridge the so-called, and I don't like this term, but the valley of death or the translational gap. And so what we try to do is provide funding to de-risk projects to get them to a point where the private sector will be interested to come in and take over those projects, provide capital, and ultimately commercialize those products. So this is the sort of traditional funding continuum. Traditionally industry gets involved, post phase 2 data. I think what I'll show and what we've seen a lot is that this funding continuum has really shifted to the left, and industry is really getting involved much earlier on, and we have some programs to try and encourage that. And so we really believe that the key to bridging the funding gap is collaboration. So it's non-dilutive capital from public agencies like CIRM, it's other nonprofit organizations, disease foundations, it's the biopharma industry who are going to be the ones who are ultimately commercializing these products. So it's essential to get them involved as early as possible. So one way that we try to do that is through a strategic partnership award. So this award provides up to $10 million of non-dilutive capital. The goal is a completion of a phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trial within a 3-year period of time. This does require matching funds. And so this is a way for us to try and engage industry to draw them in for programs that are a little more mature and really have industry have some skin in the game by providing matching funds. There's also the possibility to have elevated interest in partnered programs. So what that means is for any particular RFA, priority may be given to applicants that come in with matching funds. So we have an accelerated pathway, for instance, in preclinical development awards that priority will be given if the applicant comes in with a certain percentage of matching funds. So that's another way to try and encourage industry collaborations and using our money to help de-risk and really move these programs forward. Another example that I think is important to note, while a lot of the best stem cell research is done in California, not all of it is. And so there's a lot of great stuff going on outside of California, outside of the US. And so we partner with different organizations throughout the world. And so we typically partner with different national agencies as collaborative funding partners. And so we'll team up on any particular funding initiative, and CIRM will fund the work that's done in California. The California PI will partner with a PI based in a different geography, and that respective national entity will fund the work that's done in France or Germany or Japan, for instance. So that's another way to sort of encourage collaborations. You're talking about innovative funding mechanisms, I think, for this industry. I'd like to mention the Alpha Stem Cell Clinic Networks. This is a new initiative that CIRM has brought forth to establish a set of 5, what we're calling Alpha Clinics in the state of California. So these will be centers that are established with probably leading academic centers throughout the state, that the goal is really to provide a platform to deliver cell therapies for clinical trials. There'll also be a coordinating data and management center that helps manage the data and some of the infrastructure associated with these ongoing clinical trials. And then one other initiative I'd like to mention is our IPS initiative. So this is a $32 million initiative creating an IPS stem cell bank. It was composed of three different RFAs, a tissue collection RFA, derivation RFA, and banking and distribution RFA. And so this is creating 3,000 different IPS lines for a variety of different diseases, the first of which should actually be available in the first half of next year. And then finally, I'd like to just mention that we do encourage collaborating with industry. Part of our mission is obviously to de-risk these programs so they're at a point where industry will be involved. And I think we have had some notable achievements. So Capricor is a grantee who is developing cardiac-derived stem cells for heart failure indication. They recently announced a deal with Janssen Pharmaceuticals. It was $12.5 million up front. This is an option deal. Sangamo is another one of our grantees that has a grant to advance and file an IND for a beta thalassemia program. They did a big deal with Biogen. It was a $20 million upfront deal. And then ViaCyte was a company I mentioned earlier developing a therapy for type 1 diabetes, has received funding from several different venture firms and Johnson & Johnson Development Corp. So I think you can see our funding is achieving its mission. We'd like to see a lot more of these types of examples, but I think this does sort of prove the point that industry is getting involved in some of these programs earlier. They don't necessarily need to see phase 2 proof of concept data in humans, and our funding is really helping to sort of de-risk some of these programs and provide leverage for industry to make them feel more comfortable, hopefully getting involved in some of these novel therapies and really get involved in driving them forward towards commercialization. So with that, I think I'll stop.
Thank you. So before you disappear.
Yes.
So before we disappear, I'm going to pose 2 questions to each of the panelists when they give their introduction. First one would be, from working in CIRM, you outline a very clear strategy there. It's about de-risking the innovation process. What do you think has been your single biggest challenge in implementing your strategy in regenerative medicine?
That's a good question. I think there are significant challenges in funding regenerative medicine. Beyond the therapies themselves, we're constantly thinking about new ways to attract co-funding, and there's a lot of hesitation, and there's a lot of issues around manufacturing, CMC, scale up. How do you scale up this technology efficiently to deliver to a large number of patients? And so I think that's a challenge that we have an RFA called Tools and Technology RFA that we try to address some of these challenges. So we don't only fund the therapeutics, but we fund associated technologies to try and enable the development of the therapeutics. So I think that's been a challenge for us, and that's something that we're actively working to try to overcome.
Okay, and then what do you think has been your greatest success so far?
I think our greatest success, I'd say that's probably an easy one. I think we've really seeded the stem cell field in California and put California at the forefront of stem cell research and regenerative medicine, not only in the US, but really arguably around the world. $3 billion of funding is the largest initiative dedicated to stem cell research around. And I think in many ways, it's been sort of a bold experiment. And I think it's worked out well, and hopefully we achieve our ultimate mission of delivering therapies to patients. But short of that, I think we've achieved a lot of successes just in terms of training a new generation of scientists, building new facilities, and really seeding the landscape to really make the field grow.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for everything you've done. And please take a seat. And next we have Jim O'Neill. So as I mentioned, Jim is principally an investor, but if you may, Jim, briefly introduce yourself and give a background to your experiences in the biotech space.
Sure.
Thank you.
Up there? Yeah. So I guess I've been involved in healthcare for 12 years now, not counting some years as a patient. So first as a regulator, then as the head of a foundation that was very involved in science and technology, and currently as an investor with a technology fund. And one thing I've learned throughout all of these experiences is that the best science project is a profitable company. So that is the most sustainable way and scalable way to bring the best ideas to the largest number of people. And I'm glad to see that there are so many people from so many really outstanding science companies here. I see Xander and Edwin from Untitled Technologies, which is a truly novel drug delivery platform that has significant applications in anti-aging as well as in other healthcare issues. I see Dan Bell from Bell Biosystems, which has invented a novel form of magnetic organelles called magnels that also do some extremely important work at the cellular level. I think I see Greg Fay, who's doing some wonderful regenerative medicine stuff with his company. I look forward to meeting all the rest of you, but it sounds like you don't really need to hear what I have to say, but I'll try anyway. So when I was a regulator, I worked at the Department of Health and Human Services, and particularly a lot with the Food and Drug Administration. And so I guess I had to learn something a bit the hard way there, which is, as a libertarian, I was inclined to believe that the regulatory costs that the FDA impose kill a lot of people and provide a lot of harm to the economy. And I don't deny that. But one thing that surprised me from working with it is that the actual human beings at the Food and Drug Administration like science, they like curing disease, and they actually like approving drugs and devices and biologics. The problem is not who the people are. The problem is the overall structure and the incentives. So every time FDA approves something and someone gets sick who's used it, the commissioner is summoned to a congressional committee that also controls his budget and forced to testify under oath why he made this rash decision. And most commissioners prepare themselves very well and sweat under the lights and the oaths that they're under. But it's a miserable process, and it makes FDA people and even the FDA organization that when they might be inclined to approve things, it causes them to give considerations to things that aren't actually in the best interest of patients or even of companies. After that, I had the pleasure of running the Thiel Foundation, which supports a lot of projects related to science and technology, including healthcare. And that was a great step forward in being able to be on the solution side instead of on the problem side. We were able to support a lot of great innovative companies, especially through Breakout Labs, which is a program of the Thiel Foundation that invests in radical early stage science proto companies. Now finally, for the past 2 years, I've been working at Mithril Capital Management, which is a venture capital fund that's focused on funding transformative and durable technology companies. We're a $530 million fund. We're based in the Presidio of San Francisco. And we basically believe that the more overdue for innovation, the more obsolete or backward an industry is, the greater potential there is for innovation and for investment and for technology to make a difference. So transportation is a very backward industry. If you compare how long it took to travel across the Pacific in the 1960s versus today, if you add in the cancellation of the Concorde and the addition of TSA, we're moving backwards. In many other industries, oil and gas, farming, food, are very backwards and overdue for innovation, and I would add to that healthcare. Healthcare sort of feels like an innovative industry from the outside, if you believe science reporters. But for those of us who've worked on the inside, it's actually an extremely stagnant, extremely backwards, extremely dysfunctional industry. And it's important to fix it for the sake of all of us. It should be doing as well as the computer industry, and it's not. So at Mithril, we try to invest in transformative and durable technology companies. So transformative means something that can make a radically significant difference in the well-being of people and in the state of industries. And durable, which is perhaps easier to overlook, means companies have to be able to grow and be profitable and be big for a long time. Otherwise, they're not really going to attract the best talent and the best investment. And therefore, their ability to make a change in the world will be limited. So just a few examples in different industries to give you a sense. We've invested in mobile device security companies like Lookout, which is doing extremely well. We just invested in a fusion energy company called Helion up in Seattle that I think within a few years will be making a very big difference in the energy and electricity landscape of the country using fusion. And we recently invested in about 4 healthcare companies. Most of them have not been disclosed yet, so I'll just mention, just by way of an example, though it's not the biggest, Magforce, which is a German company that uses iron oxide nanoparticles to ablate solid cancer tumors. So in glioblastoma and in prostate, you can inject a fluid containing nanoparticles into the tumor and then use an external electromagnet to activate them and ablate the tumor. And it's still early, but it's very promising. And I think this fall I'll be able to talk about some more companies. So I'm actually giving a little talk tomorrow, so in the effort to avoid repeating myself, I think I'll stop there and turn it back to everyone else.
And I'll pose you the same question in the interest of fairness, if not Neil will feel left out. I think your entire career has really spanned catalysing innovation. In your current role, which is obviously in VC, what do you think is your greatest challenge? And I'll make it slightly more specific by what's your greatest challenge in engaging with scientists who wish to set up companies?
I'd say the greatest challenge for me is drawing a distinction between great, valid, important, and true science ideas and transformative and durable companies. Or let me just leave off transformative. So there are a lot of great scientists and great innovators with great scientific ideas, and a lot of them have the potential to change the world. And sometimes what's hard for all of us to forget is that they need to be married to a good business plan and good business people in order to actually make the change happen.
And then what do you think is likely to be your greatest success of what you've invested in?
I hope that my greatest success is discovering and building 2 or 3 companies over the next decade that make a huge difference in 2 or 3 different industries.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
So our next speaker is Mike West from BioTime. Mike is never short of a story or a new business idea. So I'm very excited to see what you have for us.
Well, thank you very much. I just joined the conference in the last few hours, and I wasn't fortunate enough to hear any of the previous speakers. So forgive me if I say something that's somewhat basic here to start, but I can't help it. So listening to the first few talks about the challenges of funding and the product development, I just wanted to underscore something that's maybe very obvious to a lot of you, but I feel very passionately about, and that's this is a historic event, this meeting, but in a historic time in the history of the United States. And I hope this doesn't sound overly dramatic or anything, but we've really got a serious problem coming to the shores of the United States, and that's the aging of the baby boom population. And I know we've all talked about it, but to set the groundwork for some of the things I want to say, I just want you to be reminded of that. The problem, of course, with aging is chronic degenerative diseases that eat up 80% of our healthcare budget in the United States. So the things that you can't fix and they stay with you for years and or decades. And aging's rife with those. We can all think of examples, right? I mean, the degeneration of your intervertebral discs in your back and the pain of arthritis, which is the #1 complaint of an aging population. But just put simply, and so I won't belabor the obvious, a lot of my corporate presentations, I'll put the demographics of aging in, and I can't count how many times like investors or venture capitalists or whatever said, I know all that stuff. And I still put them in oftentimes. I'm doing it right now because, you guys, it's a tidal wave coming to the shores of the United States. If we heard on CNN right now and everyone said, hey, you guys, we're heading for the hills, for the mountains, because a tidal wave is coming to California, and it's estimated it's going to kill 76 million Americans, it would be a panic. Well, that's what's facing, that's the baby boom surge. You know, it's hitting the shores of the United States. So I won't belabor this anymore. So that's the challenge, is chronic degenerative diseases and how do we deal with that. The opportunity. In my history involved in biotech and aging and so on, and it's been now, you know, a decade or more or whatever it's been, I've, you know, clearly, we've never seen anything like today with the power of medicine to address diseases in new ways. I just heard a seminar back in our company this afternoon, you know, and they're showing data, you know, on tens of thousands of genes and hundreds of samples. And the things we can do today were unfathomable when I was a graduate student. We have deep insights into the biology of aging. You guys know this. I mean, there are these premature aging disorders that manifest multiple aspects of aging, like progeria and Werner syndrome. And we know a lot now about, of course, we know the nature of the mutations. We know a lot now about the downstream biology. And, you know, just many of the people here in this room at this conference, if you corner them and say, hey, does all that science point the way to a new Sabin vaccine, a new concrete example of a therapeutic that could, again, forgive me for being dramatic, but alleviate the suffering of tens of millions of people? A lot of people in this conference says, absolutely, I got an idea, and it's a good idea. Back to the challenge. And by the way, I've got to highlight, you know, a lot of the discussion here at this meeting is about regenerative medicine. You guys know the power now that is given in the hands of regenerative medicine. We can make young cells from pluripotent stem cells, young cells of any kind on an industrially scalable manner, even identical to the patient by reprogramming. We know that reprogramming is capable of resetting the lifespan of cells, resetting telomere length. And because the starting pluripotent cells will replicate without limit, we can make targeted genetic modifications of any kind. So that platform, being able to manufacture young replacement cells of any kind on an industrial scalable manner with any genetic modification, is think of it as a two-dimensional canvas, you know, all these dimensions of genetic modifications, different cell types and all that, with incredible breadth and promise to alleviate suffering on a scale mankind's never witnessed before. So with all that challenge, with all that opportunity, what are we talking about here? In my mind, the challenge is funding. All of this work requires people. You know, we had the technology to go to the moon in the 1960s, but it took thousands and thousands of engineers to get it done. And getting all these products through the FDA approval process is just a huge amount of work. As some of you know, the embryonic stem cell thing began with work that we funded at Geron, And that is now been acquired by us at BioTime. It's a subsidiary of BioTime called Asterius. And the IND filing for that first product made from embryonic stem cells was the largest ever filed with the FDA. An enormous, heroic effort, but a very, I won't tell you the numbers, but it was, you would be amazed at how much money that cost in those days. It could be cheaper today, of course. So we have the funding challenge. Where is all the funding going to come from? And it's a different day. I'll tell you just a quick little fun story. I was the one that started Geron, and I was in medical school at the time, and I came here, not too far from here. Some of you know where Ming's is in Palo Alto, and met with Kleiner Perkins. Brooke Byers is one of the partners there, and some of you don't know the financial climate. Kleiner Perkins is a big name in the venture world, not as big as some of the companies on our panel. And I sold them on funding a startup company, Geron, with no patents. I think I had 1 or 2 published papers and an idea. And the idea was I felt that some of the puzzle pieces were suggesting that the telomeres were behind the Hayflick phenomenon, cell aging. And I was talking to them about if we could find this telomerase gene or genes, we didn't even know how many, could have been 100, we could immortalize human cells. Years later, I met with Brooke again, and I said, after all the funding was in place and everything was, the company was public and all that, and I said, Brooke, let's have a little man-to-man talk. Why did you fund me and Geron? I had no track record, no one knew who I was, and I said, I thought there were some genes that could immortalize cells, and all the experts in the telomere field said it was all nonsense. Why did you do this? And he said, Mike, the whole conversation you were leaning forward in your chair. And I said, what if I had low back pain? I mean, what? I don't get it. That was a different world back then. People would fund, they said, well, aging, no, there was no aging company. It was a big idea. It's a different world. You can't do that today. It just doesn't happen. Maybe in phase 3, maybe you get a hearing from a venture capitalist. So what do we do? And my proposals in order of most unlikely, but the greatest idea at first, to the more likely, but less desirable. First would be our country gets its act together and realizes under Medicare, our obligations for this 80% of chronic degenerative diseases of an aging population, people run these numbers, it's known. It's in, $5 to $10 trillion, something like that. And there's no budget for it, okay? That's the problem. It'd be great if the United States said, let's put $1 trillion to the scientific community. Is there a scientific solution that can cut the costs of healthcare and improve the cost of human life? I believe that's entirely doable. Won't happen. We could try to pass a petition around here at this meeting or something. I just don't think it's going to happen. The second idea would be FDA being revamped, policy-wise. I think that's probably unlikely as well for obvious reasons, but there's this idea floated. Arnie Kaplan and I wrote a little article on this called progressive approval. So for regenerative medicine, could we only have to show safety and then be able to market products and test the efficacy and then further safety studies in the market under essentially a phase 4? So we do patient monitoring, but it would change the industry. All of a sudden, money would flow into the industry because we would have a means of near-term revenues, which is the greatest problem in facing investment in this sector. A third idea, maybe, smaller idea, but maybe more likely. A lot of wealthy individuals donate money to universities. It's a great idea, but it doesn't fund product development. And that's what our country needs, is products. So the third idea that I would propose for us for discussion or for you guys to think about would be if wealthy individuals donate money, instead of just donating it to the university, bring in industry. And it's a very simple idea. The wealthy individual buys stock in a public company, for instance, that's in this sector, and donates the stock to the university. He gets his tax deduction. He could have some warrants on the side. He gets his tax deduction, which you had had before. The company's funded, and then the university gets the publicly traded stock, which it can use to fund its own internal programs. So there's various answers to these dilemmas, and I just tried to discuss a few of them and some of the opportunities and challenges. Thank you.
I think the other thing we should add is if you give it to any university, or you can also donate to the SENS Research Foundation. This is just at sens.org. So, Mike, what's your biggest challenge been in your career so far, bar managing the body language in meetings?
Well, probably the capital. I mean, there's some really wonderful opportunities. You know, the science is way ahead of the product development. So from the biotech standpoint, it's not, you know, can we just understand some of the nuts and bolts of the biology to find ways to intervene? I mean, there's a huge amount of opportunities out there. It's the capital and because people need to be paid to get the work done.
Yeah. And what's the opportunity which you've seized and you're most proud of?
Probably, you know, the industry in the case of some things like the telomere field and in embryonic stem cells, which could not or was not being funded by the federal government, with private funding and industry, we managed to, isolate the embryonic stem cells and, kickstart some of these areas that were important, I think, for science and technology.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. And I've made a note of your points, so we'll return to those. And then finally, without a further introduction, Bernie Siegel, head of the Genetics Policy Institute, who has been the leading patient advocate in this space for many, many years. Thank you, Bernie.
Well, thank you. A couple of little points. First of all, I'm on the cusp on September 11th of turning 65, one of these baby boomers that's going to inflict this tidal wave on all of you. However, living in South Florida, we don't call ourselves geezers, we're active adults. And of course, I want to thank the SENS Foundation and Aubrey de Grey. Aubrey had invited me years ago to speak at the University of Cambridge in the UK, and I asked him, well, on what topic? And we came up with the political and societal implications of engineered negligible senescence. And my IQ instantly went up 10 points just by being able to remember that. I think that as a patient advocate that created a 501c3 organization, the Genetics Policy Institute, I broke into the field 11 years ago, and I had filed a case that debunked a cloning claim that some group had claimed they had cloned a baby, and I thought it might establish a precedent, the first case to protect the human clone. But I didn't believe the group, and the group was really stampeding lawmakers to pass outrageous bans where scientists could be thrown into jail. But in the pendency of that case, which was a major cause celeb, I reached out to couple of scientists because I was I was thrust as a leading spokesperson against reproductive cloning of babies. And I wanted to make sure I was well grounded. And the idea was if you clone a human being, it's an absolute debacle because animal cloning was so unsuccessful. So the first scientist I spoke to was Michael West. I was introduced to him by a bioethicist at the University of Miami. And of course, at that time, he was the founder and led Advanced Cell Technology, and he was working with Bob Lanza. And I said, hey, guys, I understand you're doing this cattle cloning, and I bet it's really inefficient, it's really dangerous. They were saying, no, we just published a paper. These cattle are going to be just fine. Really blew my mind because that really didn't go to the narrative that I was saying. But I did, of course, learn and over the years got to know Mike West, who is one of the great pathfinders of our field. Absolutely, we would not be at the point where we are today without his genius. and his ability to attract capital for all those companies. So obviously, he has a way of doing it. And the way, of course, that Mike is successful, not only by leaning over in good body language, but it's by narrative. And what I found is I was invited to the field by, and mainly it was two scientists, Rudolf Janisch at MIT and Dolly the sheep's father, Ian Wilmot. They invited me to the first meeting of the ISSCR, the International Society for Stem Cell Research. And they were just forming this group in 2003. And I was honored as a patient advocate to be there. I was a cancer survivor. I had filed the cloning case and debunked the claim, and they appreciated the work. So when I went to the first ISSCR meeting, understanding that I had not an extensive knowledge in biology, I was a trial lawyer mainly in Miami in my career, but I had a passion for this new field, which from all my reading was the future of medicine. So when I went to ISSCR and I sat in some of the sessions, the scientists, of course, were talking to each other, which to a layperson is talking in tongues. You can't possibly understand what's going on. They weren't putting it in the context of anything that made any sense to me. And I was thinking back on my freshman biology, right? But I would go out and I would chat with the 5 or 6 exhibitors that were at that first meeting. And then I would talk to the scientists when they got out. And the nice thing about lawyers, we don't have to know anything but to ask good questions. And people assume we know stuff. But I asked a lot of questions, and I understood the promise of the field, but I also understood the field at the time was under siege, especially in the area of embryonic stem cell research. And that was how I entered into the field as a passionate patient advocate. And my conclusion from all these years of advocacy and creating an event called the World Stem Cell Summit that brings all the stakeholders together, including patients. It's a global meeting with about participants from 40 countries attend. But the thing that I learned from that is that there is a consumer movement out there, what I believe is a consumer movement. And what that means is that if you ask someone on the street, do you support stem cells? They will say yes, and it's not because it's a political issue, it's not because it's a public health issue, it's because it's a personal health issue that they see impacting their lives, their loved ones, and their families. That's very, very powerful. And the underpinning to this whole field, and the only way that we're going to get the capital that we need, is if we frame what we're doing, whether it's regenerative medicine, restorative medicine, rejuvenation technologies, if we frame it in a way that the public understands and appreciates. Now you want to read about stem cells, you only need to read the sports section of your newspaper, because stem cells are routinely used as treatments, minimally manipulated cell treatments for elite athletes around the world. All right? If you go in and read anything, the blogs, patients are looking for stem cells. The field is hot. If this is the future of medicine, think about how powerful this narrative is. But we have to be able to explain it to the public. We have to move forward in an ethical way, a sensible way, and come up with business models that work. The other thing that I've learned along the way as a passionate advocate of stem cells, I understand the need for industry and businesses to move this forward. There has to be medicine. There has to be something that's going to be delivered to the patient. And the only way we're going to do that is to peel this onion of obstacles on reimbursements, on standardization, on potency, on having the right tools and techniques to advance this. This is a very powerful and interesting narrative because it's overstated. This is a paradigm shift, but cell therapies absolutely is something brand new in the world, relatively treating. And the narrative that we might be able to cure chronic disease is very powerful. The message is not only that we extend the healthy human lifespan, something as a baby boomer nothing would I like more, but also the alleviation of human suffering and the challenges of delivering this to the people who need it. Thank you.
So building upon, I think, Bernie's presentation, I think the role of patient advocates and disease-specific organisations is very much changing, not in a dissimilar way to the way in which public funders such as CIRM are changing the landscape. The two examples which spring to mind are Bob Beal and the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation with Kaleido, where they obviously invested and then got a substantial financial return at the end, and also Glybera, so the gene therapy which wasn't approved in Europe and then was after pressure from patient advocates. Bernie, from your perspective as the patient advocate voice here, how do you feel you can engage most effectively with the industry in a way which is accessible to the patients themselves, but also allows you to still engage with scientists and they don't believe of this horrible conflict of interest going on?
Well, I think that patients are the ultimate stakeholders here. And it's very heartening to see organizations like JDRF, for example, investing in companies like ViaCyte, moving their clinical trials forward. So more and more you see organized medical philanthropies in the United States doing this. It's quite significant. Of course, the organization of medical philanthropies is especially strong in the United States and in Canada and in some places in Europe, but not so much really around the world. The United States is the great strength. One of the groups that we are inviting and we're honoring at the upcoming World Stem Cell Summit conference in December is the Huntington's disease community. It's a powerful community, very much supportive of CIRM, very active in California. And when you understand how that community is supportive of the researchers in California, Jan Nolta, Vicki Wheelock at UC Irvine, and how they interact with the scientists, at the same time put themselves forward to be involved in the early clinical trials that are out there. That is a high-level, sophisticated community, of course born out of absolute desperation and a horrible, horrible affliction, but they are engaged. So when we think about the silos, all right, one of the things in regenerative medicine is that it's a way of breaking through all the silos. All of us are patients. The challenge, an interesting challenge, are dealing with the leaders of the companies. For some reason, if some of them, Mike not being one, some companies think that it's just about their company. They tend to forget that they're going to be a patient one day themselves, and so are their family members, and so are their friends and their loved ones. And it's breaking down the barrier to understand that there's all one community is a great challenge, and one of the things that my group tries to overcome.
And to what extent have you engaged with the patient advocacy groups and the disease foundations in orientating your investment strategy as part of this new investment paradigm?
Oh, we're heavily engaged with patient advocates. We have a number of patient advocates who sit on our board, the ICOC. That was actually written into Prop 71, so that's part of our mandate. We strongly believe that patient advocates are instrumental in bringing new therapies to the marketplace. I think without them, there wouldn't be a strong push for a lot of these novel therapies, especially the high-risk ones, and they play a big role in bringing these therapies to patients, and I think they can put pressure on the FDA and other organizations to try and move these therapies through the clinic. And to pick up on Bernie's point, I mean, the JDRF, I think provided about $87 million of funding last year. Leukemia and Lymphoma Society provided about $127 million of funding last year. So they're a significant source of funding. We've partnered with JDRF on funding ViaCyte. And so I think these agencies where the disease foundations maybe used to focus on funding academic research, I think are increasingly funding companies and really focus on translational medicine and getting programs into the clinic. And so certain partners, I think, pretty heavily with these types of.
Can I just interject a thought? Have any of you ever seen Christopher Reeve's appeal to the United Nations that Bernie put together? You ever see that little video clip? Do you still have that on your website?
It's on the website, on my LinkedIn page.
I mean, I'm not trying to send him business, but if you look up his...
Sure, it's widespread, it's available on the internet.
So Bernie had Christopher Reeve. So back in the Bush era, there was forgive me if this sounds unkind, but not to you, but to President Bush. There was I saw it as an under-the-table, underhanded effort so he tried to ban therapeutic cloning, somatic cell nuclear transfers applied to stem cells, not cloning people, not like the aliens. Right. And it failed. So Orrin Hatch and Arlen Specter and all these Republicans were saying, hey, wait a minute, all the American Medical Association, everybody's saying that this could be a medical therapy and it's important. And so he lost that effort, right, to get it through Congress, a ban on SCNT. So he tried to get was it Puerto Rico? It was one of these Caribbean islands.
No, Costa Rica. What happened is Costa Rica initiated a proposal for a world treaty in the United Nations to ban therapeutic cloning worldwide.
Worldwide.
And it was not only Costa Rica, but the United States at the time was supportive of this, the Vatican, there were other agents in the UN.
So Bernie scrambled, again, from the patient side, and look it up. I mean, it's a very memorable video. I mean, it's one of the most touching video clips I've ever seen in my life. And he made an appeal to the United Nations on humanitarian grounds, not to cave to the pressure, and it did not pass. But that could have been, we could debate how important SCNT is going to be in the future of biotech, but at the time it was conceivably very important, and that's an incredible role, and thanks, Bernie, for doing that. I think it was a great effort.
Jim, so from your viewpoint, have you had much experience of patient advocates being an integral part of a business plan? And by that I mean they may now here be a co-funder. Clearly in clinical trial recruitment they're a critical thing. So are they part of the magic juice that makes the great plan?
They can absolutely be an essential part of the ecosystem. In order to build a durable growth business, you have to basically take every advantage that you can have in terms of communicating, in terms of organizing studies, in terms of getting government funding, in terms of putting pressure on regulators, in terms of building partnerships with other companies and other industries. So yes, I would say they're absolutely essential.
Very much so. So another thing which was touched on by the speakers was the role of novel financing models, and in particular the university donor idea, which you floated, was a great one. And also for those of you which have probably heard of this, Andrew Lowe published a great piece in Nature Biotech a while ago, the cancer megafund idea, and there was a conference in October about that, where he basically calculated and said that if we had a $3 or $4 billion cancer mega fund, then over a 10-year period it would have a 7% growth rate, and we could amortize it. Jim, to return to you, what do you think are the most innovative financing structures you've seen? And I guess that goes through from the microfinancing, with the patient advocates, all the way through to the VC model. What's the most innovative sources of capital you see?
Well, there's been a lot of funding of a lot of healthcare and science for a long time, but it often has gaps, or it often has sort of valleys of death, or areas where it's not easy to use the funding you have to build the things you need to get the next stage of funding. So one gap that we addressed a few years ago at the Thiel Foundation was the gap in getting fairly radical science ideas out of the lab, not to bedside, but just to being developed enough that angel investors and early stage VCs would be willing to look at them, and there'd be something to look at. And so we wanted to do this in a fairly routine way. We wanted to be open to lots of ideas. That was the birth of Breakout Labs about 3 years ago. It's an open application process on the website, and it's two-stage. There's a short pre-application, and you get the thumbs up that it's worth your time to do a fuller application, and that leads to a $350,000 investment on pretty good terms for the company, or I'd even say the proto-company, because we're often talking at this point about two scientists in a lab who have an idea that does have commercial potential, but it's more than a few years away from being profitable and getting to market. We open this up for all areas of science, And not to our total surprise, but it was interesting to see that the largest sector of companies that we ended up funding were in healthcare. So some physics, some materials science, but healthcare seems to have been the big pain point in early stage funding, the biggest need, the biggest sort of thing where ideas were dying instead of getting funded. And
David, so we were speaking the other day to a relatively new 501c3 organization called Benefunder, benefunder.org. And it was put together by some very well-heeled and established folks that had been in wealth management, and it's based in San Diego. So the aim of Benefunder is that they have found an unmet need where a lot of wealthy people want to give a donation to science or to biomedicine, but don't know exactly where to direct it. So they are set up a very fine dealings with the University of California, San Diego, and several other universities that they're working with, carefully sifting through some of the best science projects that might lead to eventually a translation and be helpful in the benefit of patients, and are going to be able to direct money through their contacts in the wealth management sector, the Goldman Sachs or whatever, in the world that they have. So and get these things funded. It's just another way of connecting money to research and understanding that the old model of NIH is going to give us all the money is no longer a guarantee at all, and it's too much of a struggle. We view philanthropy as a great source of supplying an unmet need and money to the field.
David, if I could also comment, I think one thing that we've seen emerge, so I guess it's not that new, but relatively new over the past few years, is sort of the build-to-buy model that's emerged in the venture world. And so CIRM funded some technology, for instance, out of Stanford. It was spun out from Versant Ventures. They provide some equity financing. They partnered with Roche. Roche is providing some milestone-based payments. And if the product is successful, actually files an IND, then Roche has the option to acquire the program and take it forward. And so, I think that's a nice example of a way that it's a program that was seeded early by CIRM funding. Industry saw a way to work with the VC community. VC saw a built-in exit. So it's a way to sort of collaboratively share the risk for some early stage novel technology.
And something actually, you alluded to earlier, which I didn't expect in this panel, but I think is actually relevant, is the role of your work in kind of process analytics and manufacturing. I think, Mike's spoken about this at length. Some of these things are quite hard to make, and I think that we shouldn't get so myopically focused on just funding in terms of a cash contribution. You've got people like CIRM, CIRM, the Canadians, UK Catapult, etc., who are often offering in-kind investments to help with the regulatory process and to de-risk, etc. I guess, Jim, can you offer a word on the phenomenon, as it were, of crowdfunding, because we can't have an investment panel without a mention of it.
I think it's tremendously exciting. A friend of mine once commented on Bitcoin that it's like Wikipedia. It's a what was the phrase? It's an idea that could never work in theory, but only in practice. That's true of Wikipedia, that's true of Bitcoin, and I think it's true of crowdfunding. Probably most people involved in funding 10 years ago would have thought it sounded silly, but it's growing in importance.
Yeah. So I'd like to echo that. I think the role of crowdfunding could be increasingly important for funding medical research and funding companies as well. And so Bernie mentioned Benefunders is a company that we've been talking to and I know well. And so it's a novel concept to try to break into the charitable market. I think the charitable donation market in the US is $300 billion a year, 10% of which goes to healthcare. I think a platform like a Benefunder that's able to sort of access a pool of that capital could provide a significant amount of funding towards research. And then there are other crowdfunding platforms such as Polywalk, for instance. There are healthcare dedicated sites that try to go out to accredited investors to try and fund companies that are raising between $1 and $5 million. Is crowdfunding ever going to fund a $20 million clinical trial? Well, probably not anytime soon, but it could fund something to bridge to the next milestone and a value inflection point to be able to attract additional capital down the road.
Yeah. And I think Mike's point was interesting earlier about his meeting with Brooke Beyer. For those of you who haven't actually read Brooke's book, Vision for Venture Capital, it's absolutely fantastic. And one of the analogies, if I remember correctly, was that when Tom Perkins, met Cohen and Boyer for the first time, he sat down with them and looked at their process, said, I will invest, but there's no way you're doing this in the lab. And he got a CRO to put the process together. So I guess the land was being rearranged for this virtual structure which we go through now. And I guess a final question for me, and then we'll open it up to the floor, would be very much, the title of the panel is very much towards a new investment paradigm. I think something we must focus on here is that at this conference where we're talking about, rejuvenation biotechnologies, things which, actively address diseases of aging, then it's a new product which needs to some extent, a new investment paradigm. From a VC perspective, when we're assessing these technologies which are meant to look at aging, which we said is this huge challenge, actually, are we being specific enough in what we're defining we're trying to solve? So when you're getting a business plan, what do you absolutely want to see? You're talking about crisp solution, and Bernie spoke about we need to frame this in a way everybody can understand.
So we don't read business plans. We meet with founders, and if that's compelling, we engage with experts and do a lot of diligence on all aspects of the business, but it's not really centered around reading a business plan, which a lot of good companies never really have. Sorry, what was the rest of your question?
The question was, when we're trying to conquer aging as a broad concept,
yeah.
Clearly there's lots of sub-areas we need to focus on.
Okay. So I guess there's two things when it comes to aging, which is probably most people in this room would sort of agree with Aubrey's definition of aging, or at least some sort of broad, comprehensive definition of aging. As he was saying this morning, you talked to a lot of people who have something to say about aging, and they can't even define aging in any kind of coherent way. I think we've probably all had that experience. So the question is, to the extent that we need to enlist other people into this fight, either as investors or as scientists or as regulators or media, can we enlist them sort of as drones or zombies to sort of participate without really understanding the vision? And the answer is maybe we can, as long as someone's keeping it on track. Or
is that
do we
doable?
have to? I think that's doable, but I think the more sorry,
durable, which is your keyword.
Yeah, I think durable, right? Well, I think the more effective way is to actually change the way people think about aging on a much bigger scale, and I think we're doing. I think the way people think about aging, the way the mainstream healthcare industry thinks about aging is night and day different from what it was 10 years ago. I think Aubrey and Mike and a lot of other people in this room have made a huge difference in the culture, both the scientific culture and the popular culture. We need to keep on doing that so that all the different parts of the ecosystem that need to participate in bringing a new product to the market and to reality and to people's lives will be doing it because they actually get the vision, which is identifying and stopping and reversing aging, and not tinkering around the edges with small symptomatic things.
Just a small point, but wait, there's more. You have to, when you consider about aging, really, who controls the narrative about aging? And you might remember there are a couple of really sharp guys, a couple of osteopath physicians in Fort Lauderdale back in the day in the 80s, and they created what we would call today, or what is called, the anti-aging movement. And the anti-aging movement is hugely powerful and has really controlled the narrative all these years. So I've spoken at one of their conferences once, and I was all dressed up and organized to talk about regenerative medicine. I was talking to the prominent scientist who was going to speak before me, and I said, well, doctor, what's your specialty? Mushrooms. Mushrooms are the key. We eat mushrooms, we can really, we won't age. And I'm sure his research was very serious, and I wasn't qualified to read his paper. But you will go to the exhibit hall and you're drinking, they're selling H3O. All right? So what are we dealing with here? That is a very powerful narrative, and I'm not knocking it. A lot of the people they set up their own accreditation system, but you can see all sorts of things that are anti-aging. So What we're talking about here is something different. But if you think about narratives, that is a very powerful narrative. How do we integrate this narrative of absolute real science with real companies to deliver some real product, regenerative medicine product, for restorative or rejuvenation? And that is a challenge that we have to go in with our eyes open. And I think it's a real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a shared responsibility, all stakeholders, to make sure that we remain objective and don't mislead people. So I think that's a sin for us all. In the spirit of sharing, are there any questions from the floor for our panel? Gentleman in the blue shirt. Do we have a microphone? Use your fine lungs. So if I may repeat the question for those that couldn't hear, and I apologise if I don't paraphrase very effectively. It's that the metric which we've spoken a lot about today is, can the company be sustainable, can it be durable, and can it ultimately make a profit? And the underlying assumption there is it's a financial profit, and you're absolutely correct. There's different types of metric for profit. The analogy was then brought that vaccines, whether it be the Ebola currently or H1N1, there was a greater urgency, and people were less focused on kind of starting a company and more getting to a solution. Another great example with penicillin during the war. And then the gentleman said, is there a model whereby we don't focus just on companies and more on the problem, and realise that aging is this tidal wave which we spoke about?
Well, I think there is a way to do it. Mike, you framed it out. The baby boomer tidal wave is going to swamp the world. I think when we look at patient advocacy over the years and how it has moved the needle, you can think about historically the March of Dimes, and move up to the AIDS, HIV crisis, a public health emergency, and a group, arguably a discriminated group of gay men, and agitation in the street, which did move the needle on moving these things forward. The breast cancer movement, why do we all wear pink ribbons? Women's health was always a neglected, underfunded area. So you combine the group with the issue, and all of a sudden you see a great surge of movement, moving the regulatory needle and the funding needle. The reason we have Prop 71, and the reason we talk about stem cells, and it's part of almost popular culture today, is because there was a political movement to stifle it at the beginning. And an obscure area of developmental biology was made quite famous, because when patients understood something that could be represented hope was going to be taken away, there was a counteraction. And that included Prop 71 and passing protections for embryonic stem cells in the constitutions of Michigan and Missouri and things like that, a real movement. Absent a threat or a crisis and an understanding that this is an emergency, it's hard to move the needle. Washington is stagnant. In the United States, by the way, it's deplorable that it does not have as a priority a regenerative medicine strategy. Japan does. Iran has one. The UK has one. Why not? Canada has one, certainly. Where's the United States in this? Where's the sense of it? It's a bottom-up thing, and we just have to constantly push it forward.
I can see we have a queue of people, so I will go for the first man.
Hi, my question is for Neil Littman. So back in early July, there was an article published from the scientific journal Nature on CIRM, and CIRM, not the particle accelerator, and yeah, wrong place. Anyways, so they were basically talking about the restructuring. You had a new president come in, Randall Mills. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
And they were just talking, they kind of left it with a cliffhanger. It was a really hefty article about financial troubles, certain people backing out, and a miscommunication with the public. There was a scientist, or excuse me, there was an investor that basically stood up and said, why don't I have a cure yet? And we're all scientists, or mostly scientists here, so we know that you can't just inject stem cells into people and expect things to happen. But that doesn't always communicate to the public. So it's only been a month, or a little over a month. What has been done? What has Randall Mills kind of stepped in and took over to communicate this better with the public? And one more addition to that, they kind of left it at the end saying that CIRM was in financial trouble and it might not be around by 2016. And could you just comment on that?
Sure. So I think all very good questions. And I think the first thing that Randy did when he came in was do a financial assessment of the organization. And so it had previously been stated in the public domain that CIRM was running out of funding. Our last awards would likely go out in the 2017 timeframe. So the first thing Randy did when he came in was sort of review the finances, review how much money we put out on an annual basis, look at our burn rate, like any good CEO of any company would do, and realize, well, that's not exactly true. I mean, we still have about $1 billion of funding left. And so we put forth about $190 million or so a year. And so based on that rate, our funding should really last till 2020 or so. So I think the idea that we're running out of funding is simply is not true. I mean, we have plenty of funding to last for another 5-6 years at least. Our last grants will be probably posted in 2020. Beyond that, we'll have to manage those grants through a 3 or 4 year life cycle. We have talked about the sustainability of CIRM. So beyond what we currently have, beyond the $1 billion, how are we going to sustain ourselves? And there's potential to go back to the public and put something on the ballot in 2016. That's not something that CIRM would do, but Bob Klein has spoken publicly about potentially doing that. We're investigating other avenues of some sort of private-public partnership, tapping into the philanthropic market, high net worth individuals is another avenue we could pursue. But that notwithstanding, I think we still have about $1 billion to deploy, and that should last for another 6 or so years.
Okay, and now I'm bombarded with questions, so it's like being at a bar. We'll go with the lady first.
Hi, my name is Mallory McLaren. I'm a professor of bioethics at Cal State Monterey Bay. So my first thought was that first to agree with Bernie and Neil both and the panel that a regulatory rethink and is desperately needed, as well as a rethink of how we manage coding and reimbursements. I mean, a major problem on the end of the line with medical therapies being able to be delivered to patients is that if there's no code to use for the billing purposes and insurance, then patients can't really afford these types of things. So keeping in mindset CIRM and what it's doing, what do you think that CIRM and or CIRM or agencies like CIRM could do more of, or how could they more properly effectuate this type of movement forward with coding and reimbursements and regulatory rethinks in DC? And for Bernie specifically, do you propose any other types of agencies or outfits that might be able to effectuate this progress besides government agencies such as CIRM?
I guess there's two questions. So very, very briefly, this was asked to Neil, but I won't allow Neil to be too bombarded. I guess what is CIRM doing and what may it do to support reimbursements, etc.? And I guess that will become more pertinent perhaps as some of the things you've invested in actually get towards the market.
Sure. No, I think that's a very good question. And so it's both the reimbursement and the regulatory environment. So CIRM has an active dialogue with the FDA, for instance. We hold educational webinars. We have white papers that we've put forth. And so I think it's important to generally understand the regulatory framework for the programs that we invest in, but also for the field in general, and to relay that information to the public to try and make everyone aware of what are the regulatory steps that the agency is going to require to get certain therapies approved. And it varies indication by indication, and some of them are not well established because a lot of these therapies haven't actually gone into the clinic for certain indications. I think reimbursement is an absolutely critical piece. It's a piece that we think a lot about. I mean, we do have dialogue with different payers to try and think about what it will take from a reimbursement standpoint. And I think a unique challenge within the regenerative medicine field from a reimbursement standpoint is a lot of the therapies that we're working to develop are curative in nature. right? So you look at Glybera that has a high price tag. Well, a lot of these therapies are going to be, or theoretically could be a one-time treatment. And so how do you think about pricing that? Is a $1 million price tag going to be feasible from a reimbursement standpoint? So I think these are the kind of issues that we need to think through ahead of some of these products getting to the market, and I think CIRM tries to play an active role in doing so.
Okay. I think very briefly then to your second question, and in future we always have one within a shorter time, but Bernie and also Mike, as a person which has led many a trial, what potential other novel mechanisms, organisations or rules of engagement may there be to regulate?
So this is like the Cambrian explosion of life. All these new organizations are coming into play, some dropping off, some coming on. CASME, David's organization, cutting edge organization, trying to move the needle forward. He can explain that. Novel ideas, we're trying to get the insurance industry involved in the cell banking industry so that there will be a reimbursement if a child that the family's banked the cord blood, that no matter if that cord blood is there, those cells or other cells are needed, that there will be a policy. Swiss Re, the big reinsurance company, underwrote a policy in Israel. They've sold 22,000 policies. 22,000 policies. It could be revolutionary if there was an insurance product that could go along at the time a family banks its cells. These are the types of novel ideas that are coming into play because this is a revolutionary field.
Yeah. And yourself, Mike?
I just make kind of a tangential point, but the point related to all this. A lot of the reimbursement theoretically is based on benefit to the patient in the long term, cutting the long-term costs of healthcare. And what I think is an amazing lapse of understanding from the world of science to the policymakers is that in all the healthcare debates, if you listen to the healthcare funding debates, as I have, public debates on the radio and everything else, I haven't ever once heard anybody say, you know what, maybe the scientific community could come to the rescue and cut healthcare costs with a new novel therapeutic innovation. And is that possible? Absolutely. Yeah, and the example I give, which is kind of over the top, is smallpox. How much does it cost the healthcare system in the United States today to have eliminated smallpox from the face of the earth? Zero. Not a penny, because it's gone. And I'm not saying that regenerative medicine therapy is going to eliminate disease, but in principle, I can just, we don't have time, but I can think of numerous examples of where chronic degenerative diseases that cost so much because it requires in-home care and groceries delivered, and people are, that if we could regenerate function in that painful joint or in the failing heart or whatever, the person can live an independent lifestyle. And I think with those cuts in costs, we could have reimbursement. But my point is, I don't believe we're doing a good enough job communicating that to Washington, because they're, again, I'm not political, but President Obama appears to think that all such new medical innovation will just ramp up the costs, and so we can't really afford it. I think that's part of the philosophical underpinnings of why the United States is not heavily investing in innovation in the sector.
And then also, we have a final question for this gentleman here.
All right, short question, Martin Borg-Jensen, Buck Institute. On the topic of controlling the narrative, does the panel have controlling the narrative of anti-aging research and movements? Do you have thoughts on what would be the most effective methods to convince the general public, not the people in the panel or in this room who kind of know what's what, but how do I argue that someone from the anti-aging movement is a fraud? Because I have a PhD, but he has a PhD, right? And so what do I say? He'll come up with some complete bullshit. And what do I say?
I disagree. You don't have to clash with other groups. They have a narrative that has created a huge amount of interest in the field. They have built a foundation of public interest. How do we tap into that? So at the conference we put together, we're going to have a regenerative services track. with the American Society of Plastic Surgery and Orthopedic Society and IFATS and different groups that are legitimate groups to talk about what's here and now and to try to capture the imagination and bring people over to a side of clear, legitimate science. Personally, I'm a realist. I'm very pragmatic, and believe that public knowledge about this issue and creating public appreciation for it is what needs to be done. I couldn't have said it better than Mike said it, talking about the 76 million baby boomers. How do we convince them that 50% of our population, my generation, a few years from now, hopefully far many years from now, are going to be sitting there in dementia? That's not a pleasant thought. We have to get the narrative that there's a solution out there. It's just a matter of keep pounding the drum beat, I think.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I have to say, thank you very much to my panel, and I apologise to those of you that had questions. We've come to an end, but we're going to have a 10-minute break at the end of this session, so if the panellists are happy to, we can take questions at the side. So I think what we've learned today, and by way of a précis, is that looking at regenerative therapies is not simple, but they have incredible potential. I think a key point from the panel was actually aging and diseases of aging is a very broad topic, but how can we communicate that effectively? And also, there are numerous modalities in order to catalyse investment into the field. We heard about crowdfunding. We heard about novel public-private partnerships. We're in California. Prop 71 is one of the most novel funding pathways we've seen. And for those of you who've been following social media, perhaps throwing a bucket of ice over you is a way to raise money these days for ALS. But I think fundamentally, it is really a communication issue, whether that's to VC, to the entrepreneur, to your friendly funder, or the patient advocate. We need to be better at communicating what we're going to do with the money, and then think about creative ways about how to use it. One word which is mentioned a lot today and is close to my heart is risk. So the next panel this afternoon will be looking at actually the unique risks faced by an aging population, how we can mitigate those by using novel therapies. And that will be led by Kathleen Hoffman, who I see at the back of the room, and Peter Nakada from Risk Management Services. So thank you very much, and we will reconvene at 1:45, and please thank the panelists as well.